1, 2, and 3 together. Today's series 3. We're talking about hip control today, and hopefully by this point you've been practicing how the face should work and getting your horse to follow and give to pressure, and hopefully you've been getting control and access to the shoulder, the most critical piece probably that we've discussed in series 2. And today we'll get right into kind of talking about how to get control of the hip. And what I do with the horse, this is probably the hardest piece for people to get comfortable with, because they can see everything that's happening up here, but they have to feel for what's happening in the back. And so this is a combination, getting access to this hip is a combination of having to use my legs and my hands together to get this horse to understand what I'm actually asking. In the beginning, he may be very confused and not want to stand in place and not want to give to the hip pressure, but more or less move forward or move backwards or do something else. And we'll talk about how to address some of those problems coming up here. But in the very beginning, when I'm trying to get my horse to move off of pressure from the hip, I simply just stand here and I'm going to ask his hip to move both right and left. And so here I'll get two hands on my horse in case I need them. I'm not picking up pressure with my hands, but they're going to be there in case I need to get contact with the horse's mouth. And I'm simply going to ask this horse to move his hip to my left and use my right leg. So I'll slide my right leg back a little bit and just hold a little bit of pressure, not much. You can see the horse is thinking about doing something. There, the hip's slow. We're not really doing much, so I'm going to move more pressure. There we go. Ask for one more step. There we go. I like that. Let go of my legs and my hands and simply do that back and forth. So let's move back to my right. Left leg, nice and soft. Barely touch the horse there. Asking for one more step, maybe one more. There we go. And let go with my legs and my hands. And what I'm thinking about in terms of pressure is I always want to ask with a very soft pressure or cue, and then go more advanced, more advanced, more advanced, or more pressure on the cue, more pressure on the cue, and eventually if I need to bump or maybe kick a little bit, I will if the horse is not doing what I'm asking him to do. So remember those three things that we talked about in the very beginning in terms of providing a cue, waiting for a response, and then reinforcing that. My cue here is my leg pressure, so I'm going to move back the other direction. If he doesn't move, I'm just going to take my leg and bump a little bit, holding this front end in place and ask him to move that hip around a little bit more responsively. There we go. And then let off. So if I always ask from the very beginning with a hard, sharp cue, then everything I do in the future, I'm going to have to ask for that hard, sharp cue. And what I really like to do is be able to barely touch the horse, him feel the cue, and respond to the cue accordingly. So that's the simplistic part. Now I want to put this in motion just like I did everything else. And so in the very first two series of videos we did, we talked about having this, following this nose around, shoulders following the nose around in this circle. With the hip, I'm going to add to that. So I'm going to go back to what we've been talking about. Here we are again walking that same circle. The horse is following with the shoulder, but this hip is just trailing out. And now I want to ask this hip to do something else. And what I'm going to ask it to do, when I walk back to you and get straight, what I'm going to ask this hip to do is basically to collapse around my inside leg. So I've already got the face kind of going this way. The hip is trailing behind. And what I'm going to ask with my left leg going to the right is ask for this hip to follow around and kind of try to meet towards the nose a little bit. And we'll talk about why I like that in just a second. But here we are. Get back in our shape of our circle. I'm going to hold this front. There we go. Hip comes to the inside. Just a step or two and let go again. So all I'm doing is asking this horse to kind of hold his front end up. Nose stays in the shape of that circle that I'm traveling. Here I'll do it away from you. So I'm just kicking this hip to the inside and making the hip step to the inside while the shoulder remains up. And if it doesn't, I'll just bump with my inside leg. And when I feel like the horse is soft and going well, then I let go. So one more time coming back to you, I'll do it to the left. So in theory, we've got this circle going to the left, and all I'm going to do is use my right leg, kick that hip to the inside. Here you can feel it fall to the inside a step or two and let go. So most importantly here, the shoulders are staying up, the nose is to the inside of the circle, and so I'm getting this bend around my inside leg. Now where that's important or why that's important is for things like lead departures. Or maybe in the future for a lead change, a flying lead change, I'd want to have that shape coming into to a lead change. or specifically here, that shape in evolving into a nice clean lope departure. So if I'm standing from a standstill and I want to lope off into the left lead, what I'm going to do is hold this front just a little bit, shoulders up, and you can notice that hip's coming to the left. This is the shape I want for that lope departure going to the left lead. If I can get my horse soft and comfortable in making that shape, then I have ensured with a high probability that my horse is probably going to take the correct lead. And just the other way to the right. So that's a very good exercise. Once you get the hip moving, maybe walk some circles, shaping that hip to the inside, and you say, well, maybe I don't know what that feels like. Well, the best piece of advice I can give you is get somebody that can watch you and look at the way your horse is stepping to the inside or not, and then maybe even evaluate where your body position is. Maybe your leg's not back far enough. Maybe you didn't spend enough time in the very beginning stages and need to go back a step or two before you get to a more advanced maneuver. So with those two things are fairly easy. Now if you want to get more complicated or get up into a more advanced maneuver, I do a lot of counter cantering as well. Counter cantering is a great exercise in preparation for the lead change, but it also tells me that I've got control of all the pieces of this body, specifically the hip. And the counter canter, if you don't know, is simply being in the opposite lead of the direction you're traveling. So I'm going to take off here in just a second in a circle to the right, and you'll notice that I'll ask my horse to be on the left lead. Okay, the other thing I'll do once I get comfortable in that counter-canter circle and my horse feels very soft and very supple in counter-cantering is simply start asking him to counter-canter squares. I'll show you that too. So counter-canter in a circle, I'll step right off here wanting to go to the right. I'm going to shape my horse for a left lead because that's the counter-canter. And all I'm doing is simply loping to the left to the right in the left lead. And if you can see my right leg, it's tied down pretty well, pretty firm against the horse's body, and telling him not to move over to the right. Stay over to the left. That way we stay on this left lead. Now, once my horse is comfortable with something like that, I may go ahead and start counter-cantering squares. So square this end off, lope straight. Again, square this end off, lope straight. Ooh. And then just ask that horse to go in a counter-canter on a square. Now, one thing you may ask in terms of comparison to the last videos, you said, you know, you've always used your legs in the other two videos in a bump, bump, bump or a kick, kick, kick kind of method. In this video, you're using a more of a steady pressure, and that is correct. What I'm asking with my legs now is for this horse, I'm basically creating a barrier and asking this horse to keep his hip, in this example, to the left by keeping a firm right leg. Now that doesn't mean that I'm burying my spur into him. I'm really not. I'm really just holding a firm calf to him and telling him, I'd like you to stay with your hip to the left. Don't move it back over here to the right. If for any reason I felt that horse want to move into my leg and move to the right, maybe he switches leads on me when I didn't ask him to, I'm simply going to use that right leg and bump, bump, bump until he gives and gets back over to the left. So everything I've done in terms of moving the face, getting the shoulders to follow or move independently of the face, and then following with a lot of hip control and hip placement, then those things like counter-cantering become fairly easy. And when we move into really advanced things like lead changes, flying lead changes, those I wouldn't say are easy by any means, but definitely give us more credibility, ability to get our horse to do something like that. I hope that those three things and moving all the pieces of the horse are helping you. If they're not, please keep practicing, because the suppleness that you develop in doing each of those pieces individually and then also combining them together are things that are absolutely paramount to getting a horse that is willing to do a lot more advanced things. If you try to move into advanced maneuvers, and that could be over a number of different disciplines, those things become very difficult if you haven't spent the time, the homework in doing those three things. The last thing I'll leave you with in terms of practice, no matter where your horse is at, this is a 3-year-old that I've been riding for probably 6, 7, 8 months now, and every day we go back to maybe 5 minutes in the warm-up or 5 minutes in the cool-down of those exact same things